Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy reportedly telling House Republicans today about the debt ceiling negotiations with President Joe Biden. "We are nowhere near a deal. I need you all to hang with me." It's just 9 days until the Treasury Department says without a debt ceiling increase or suspension, the U.S. could default. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg with an air travel update ahead of the busy Memorial Day holiday weekend, and concerns that there may not be enough air traffic controllers to prevent possible flight delays. U.S. House joining the Senate in overturning the Environmental Protection Agency's new clean air rule for heavy-duty truck emissions. President Biden says he'll veto that bill. A bipartisan immigration reform bill introduced in the House, with everything from border security to asylum process reform to a path to citizenship for some undocumented immigrants. We'll hear from a Republican and Democratic sponsor and talk about the bill with Washington Post reporter Theo Meyer. And in Russia, the detention of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is extended by 3 months. He faces espionage charges. U.S. government says he's wrongfully detained and should be released immediately. This story from CNN. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy told Republicans during a closed-door meeting on Tuesday that he's not close to a bipartisan deal with President Joe Biden to avoid a first-ever default on the nation's debt. Speaker McCarthy told the Republicans, "We're nowhere near a deal. I need you all to hang with me." CNN article continues, as each day passes without a deal, the clock is ticking closer to a looming deadline for default, which could be catastrophic for the global economy and have financial effects on countless Americans. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen reaffirming in a letter to Speaker McCarthy on Monday that it's highly likely that the U.S. Treasury will not be able to pay all of its bills in full and on time as soon as June 1st. But several Republicans, including the House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, have suggested that they do not believe Secretary Yellen's estimate of June 1st as the so-called X date for potential default, and called on her to testify before Congress. Also, this from the article: while Speaker McCarthy has maintained that both parties could still obtain a deal by the June 1st deadline, he is now also accusing the president of trying to disrupt negotiations by bringing proposals involving Medicare and Social Security back into the fold. Well, after today's closed-door meeting of House Republicans, Congressman Garrett Graves, Republican from Louisiana, one of the negotiators for Speaker McCarthy, who's been meeting with the team representing the president, spoke with reporters outside.
Did you get back to talking last night? How did things go?
Did talk again last night. Look, we're still far apart until this administration is willing to recognize that they are having record spending, record deficits, and record taxes. Then we're not going to be able to come together. We are demanding a different trajectory for this country. You're putting the next generation in jeopardy. I want you to think about this for a minute. 17.5 cents of every single tax dollar that's coming into this country over the next 10 years is going to be going to interest on the debt, just interest on the debt. We're approaching $250,000 per household. This is unsustainable. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, or over $100 billion more than President Obama and Vice President Biden had proposed for this year, over $100 billion more than President Trump had proposed. These numbers are not unreasonable. What's unreasonable is the White House position. It's irresponsible, and it literally is jeopardizing the generation after us, the children and grandchildren of today, and this is just unsustainable.
So are they still demanding a freeze instead of pulling back?
They are refusing to truly change the trajectory, to truly reduce spending. And that is a red line. We're not going to continue doing the way things have been done. It's irresponsible.
How concerned are you about timing at this point?
Look, I am. I'm very concerned about timing, which is why they need to come to the table, which is why it was irresponsible for them to wait 100 days before they were willing to engage and begin having these conversations. Let's be clear. Just like the border crisis was self-manufactured, the energy crisis was self-manufactured, what we're dealing with today was manufactured by this administration as well. We are willing, and we told them on the first day of negotiations that we would stay in that room 24 hours. We told them that. They said, no, let's wait, let's break, let's do meetings in the morning and afternoons. Our commitment stands. We'll work all night, we'll do 24 hours, but we're not going to continue on this trajectory. It's irresponsible, and it jeopardizes the future of the next generation. Thank you.
Are you guys meeting today?
Yes.
Congressman Garrett Graves, Republican from Louisiana, with reporters this morning after the regular closed-door meeting of House Republicans. Congressman Graves has been one of the members negotiating on the debt ceiling issues on behalf of Speaker McCarthy. Back to the CNN article, Republican Study Committee Chair Kevin Hern said Speaker McCarthy told members they should go home and work their districts if a deal isn't reached by the White House and Republican negotiators by Memorial Day weekend. Members can always be called back, but Congressman Hern told reporters that this is a deal that has to be reached between a few key people. Here is Congressman Hern of Oklahoma with reporters.
Did McCarthy say that they were nowhere near a deal?
No, he said we're closer every day, but we've got to get there.
Anything about staying this weekend or coming back next week?
Well, again, he's told us all, and so has the leader, that we just need to stay within 24 hours notice. The negotiations are with the Speaker and his team and the White House and their team, and so the rest of us being here just waiting around, it doesn't do any good for anyone to go back to your districts, work your districts. Folks back home know what we know, which is we're going to pay our debts. But they also want a reduction in spending because the thing that's hitting them the most is inflation and interest rates, which has been caused by the spending. So the Speaker's on point, the Republicans are on point, and we're going to stay on point. It's time to bend the spending curve, and we're going to do that.
The Speaker told you that members can go home if there's no deal in hand.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Congressman Kevin Hern, Republican from Oklahoma, with reporters this morning. From The Hill newspaper, House Republicans are canceling this week's markup sessions for fiscal 2024 government funding bills as debt limit talks heat up between the White House and GOP leadership. Congresswoman Kay Granger, Republican from Texas, chaired the Appropriations Committee, saying in a statement, given recent developments in the negotiations between Speaker McCarthy and the President, and in order to give the Speaker maximum flexibility as talks continue, the committee will postpone this week's markups. At the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre questioned about the President's positions.
Republicans have said the White House has shown a lack of urgency around negotiations. We're 9 days from the end of the month, and under House rules, it could take 4 days to get a deal on the floor for a vote. The Speaker wants a deal to be cut this week. What is the White House's deadline for reaching a deal to get it for a vote in time?
So look, as I stated, the conversations, as the Speaker has stated, as we have stated, have been productive, which is important. Clearly, that we're moving forward. As I think just moments ago, the team from the White House who were on the Hill for the budget negotiation that just ended. They met for hours, and so they're going to be returning and clearly give the President an update. But look, this is urgent, but this is not political. This is about doing the work of and the business of the American people. This is something that we have said over and over again for the past 5 months, that this is for Congress to act. This is their constitutional duty. So we've been very clear, and we've shown urgency from here. And look, we think Republicans saying that the White House is not showing any urgency is a ridiculous question, is a ridiculous statement for them to be making. And so we've been saying this for months. Congress must ask, Congress needs to act, and we'll continue to lay the line on that.
So oftentimes when these meetings happen, the White House or other parties call them productive. That's a word is often used. But can you say that we're actually closer to a deal now than we were last week?
So what I can say is reiterate what the President and the Speaker said. The Speaker said this yesterday, that the conversation yesterday was productive. And I think that's important when you're hearing that, and these types of negotiations, as we know, are very difficult, right? Negotiations, this is nothing new. They are incredibly tough. And so when you hear it from both sides saying that they're productive, I think that's an important statement. I'm just not going to get into any further details.
And the last question is, the Treasury is looking for ways to delay certain payments. Is the administration trying to push back the X date? Is there potential that a deal won't be reached and you're going to need to kind of juggle these payments to make
so look, anything relating to the X date or that is concerning how to move forward here as it relates to that, I would refer you to the Treasury Department on their communications with agency. That is something that they would certainly lay out. As the Treasury said yesterday, it's important to have accurate information about inflows and outflows to the government so they can continue to produce an accurate forecast for Congress of when cash and extraordinary measure expire. So this sort of communication is actually consistent with prior debt limit impasses. So that is something for sure that the Treasury Department will have more to share on.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her briefing at the White House. The House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said Monday night on the debt ceiling talks, as part of the effort to find common ground, we're willing to consider freezing spending. Another article from The Hill reads, Congressman Jeffries acknowledged the unpopularity of the spending freeze, which Democrats have characterized as a cut when inflation is factored in. But he suggests he's willing to accept it anyway as a concession to the Republicans who control the House. The House Democratic Caucus chair, Pete Aguilar of California, held a news conference today.
Can you characterize kind of where your sense of the caucus is right now based on the negotiations? I mean, we heard some pretty positive things last night from the Speaker. We heard some pretty positive things from the President. Yet, I listened to some of your remarks and the whip and the leader out on the steps here, and it seemed like there was a bit of a chasm between what the White House was saying and what you guys were saying, and what some members more on the liberal side of your caucus were. Is there some divide between the White House, or is there something that you guys need to push for to make sure, or is this an effort to make sure that they don't give up the farm in this negotiation?
There's no divide. There's no divide. We have said from the very beginning that we are not going to stand by as devastating cuts are put in place that harm the economy and harm our communities. That's what Democrats stand for. Those are our main principles. We continue to have that position. And I think, what you heard from us is, merely, amplifying that Republicans are creating this artificial cliff. They are changing the elements of negotiation. We are happy that people are talking, of course. That's better than the alternative. But they still are being held by the most extreme portions of their conference in what they are asking for. And we continue to feel that is, unproductive, and that isn't, pointing toward progress. The president has said we want to make robust investments in our budget. It'll create jobs, it'll help our communities, it'll support our economy. Republicans have said we want to roll back to FY22 cuts. We want to cut $130 billion out of the federal budget. We want to take food out of the mouths of families. What the president has come back at, what you heard the leader say, is we can have conversations about holding the line on spending at FY23 levels. That is a completely reasonable position in exchange for a 2-year increase in the debt limit.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, a Democrat from California, the caucus chair at a news conference today. The story from Reuters, strategists at some of Wall Street's biggest banks are sounding increasingly worried about the potential market fallout from the standoff over raising the U.S. debt ceiling, even as stocks continue grinding higher. For now, equity investors seem unflustered as the deadline to avoid a catastrophic first-ever U.S. government default draws nearer, in part because most are confident lawmakers will eventually reach a deal. The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell also sounding confident during a stop in his home state of Kentucky.
Are you concerned about timing at this point?
Look, I think everybody needs to relax. The last 10 times we raised the debt ceiling, there were things attached to it. This is not that unusual, and is almost entirely required when you have divided government. Regardless of what may be said about the talks on a day-to-day basis, the President and the Speaker will reach an agreement. It will ultimately be passed on a bipartisan vote in both the House and the Senate.
So are you confident that the country will not default?
The country will not default.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, in Kentucky today. That posted by WLEX-TV in Lexington. The Senate is not in session in Washington this week, but the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, has said that should a deal be reached on the debt ceiling, senators can be called back to vote on it within 24 hours. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 231, NASDAQ down 160, S&P down 47. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg asked today about how a possible federal government debt default could impact his department and the millions of American travelers who rely on its operations. Secretary held a news conference about Memorial Day weekend travel. That weekend is the traditional start of the summer travel season.
Is there any potential fallout for summer air travel if there's a default?
I know it won't be good. It's difficult to even fathom some of the implications. I think honestly, the biggest thing that I would be worried about is severe economic damage. So right now, a lot of the problems we have arisen because demand came back so quickly, because the economy came back so quickly, that passengers had the income and the inclination to get back to the skies years before most forecasters thought they would. A default puts us in the opposite scenario. Maybe the problem wouldn't be a system that's bursting at the seams, but I do expect it in the same way that, I wouldn't even say expect, because default's not an option. We can't let it happen. But one of the many reasons that we can't let it happen is that you would be seeing the kinds of economic harms that we just lived through, only worse and less temporary.
Would there be an impact on FAA staffing, anything at DOT?
So in the short term, the operations continue. I think in the long term, the macroeconomic effects could have any number of second-order consequences for our ability to do our work.
Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, at a news conference today. He said that last Friday, 2.65 million people were processed by the Transportation Security Administration, the highest air passenger traffic since February of 2020. And he says this weekend, Memorial Day weekend, expected to be higher. Yet memory of air flight mass delays over the past year are fresh. The secretary says air traffic control staff is about 3,000 less than he would like it to be. This past weekend, the Federal Aviation Administration halted flights at Denver International Airport due to staffing problems. More questions to the secretary.
How concerned are you that air traffic control staffing will lead to more delays in places like Jacksonville Center? We saw issues in Denver twice over the last couple of days. How concerned are you that is going to continue to build, given the fact that it's going to take a couple of years to shore up the shortage?
Yeah, it's a concern, and it's part of what motivates us right now to be putting so much emphasis on the recruiting, the hiring, and the training. We need to make sure that we have the workforce that's ready to have more of a cushion. Now, I do want to stress, because I think sometimes the way this gets talked about publicly, people imagine that there's an empty seat somewhere, where really what we're talking about more often is reserve capacity or the ability to absorb an unexpected disruption, like the Denver situation, where it largely had to do with somebody being sick, COVID. We need more layers that allow us to absorb that, but it's certainly a concern.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Because I spoke to NTSB Chair Jennifer Hominy today, and there was this whistleblower complaint about controllers feeling overworked at Jack Center, and she says it's a safety issue, especially as we see these rolling incursion issues happen since the start of this year. So what do you say to that? I mean, it seems like maybe the short-term fix is not as good as the long-term fix.
Well, the best solution is the long-term fix, which is to make sure that we have enough of a cushion in the staffing model that we can absorb anything that comes up operationally, anything that affects a particular tower or particular center. But I also want to emphasize that FAA is not going to allow an unsafe condition to arise. So, there are very strict requirements in terms of how long a controller can be on station, for example. We are not talking about weakening any of those standards in order to accommodate any of the issues that are coming up. Safety has to be a bottom line, and that's where, at the end of the day, we don't want to see any operational impacts, delays, cancellations, or any of that, but would rather see that than any kind of safety problem arising.
The Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg taking questions from reporters. The U.S. House today passed a bill that would repeal the Environmental Protection Agency's new clean air emission standards for heavy-duty trucks, starting with the model year 2027. The U.S. Senate passed this bill last month to undo the EPA rule, so it now heads to President Biden, who says he plans to veto it. Some of the floor debate, Congressman Bill Johnson, Republican from Ohio, in favor.
The EPA even acknowledges that the new standards are 80% more stringent than existing emission standards. But the agency ignores the fact that new trucks already have 98% fewer nitrogen oxide emissions than trucks manufactured 35 years ago. At a certain point, you start to see diminishing returns. EPA's regulatory efforts are just the latest step by the Biden administration to electrify the transportation sector and burden American families in the process. The agency itself emphasizes that the rule will cost the truckers between $39 and $55 billion. In fact, the rule is expected to increase the cost of a semi-truck anywhere from $8,000 to $42,000 per truck. And as we all know, the cost of these senseless regulations would inevitably be passed on to the American consumer through higher retail prices and increased inflation. Ohio sits at the crossroads of America, and thousands of trucks travel across my state to transport goods to my constituents and businesses throughout the nation. An unworkable rule like this one will stop some of these deliveries, cause delays for many others, and lead to shortages for some of our most basic staples.
Congressman Bill Johnson, Republican from Ohio, on the House floor, arguing against this bill to repeal the EPA heavy-duty truck emissions regulation. Congresswoman Kathy Castor, Democrat from Florida.
It's important to tackle the problem of heavy-duty trucks and buses. Why? Because 6% of the vehicle, they constitute about 6% of the vehicles on the road, but 59% of smog-producing elements. That means nitrogen dioxide, ozone, and particulate matter. And the last time that EPA updated their rule relating to heavy-duty trucks and buses was 20 years ago. So science and technology have evolved, the trucking industry has evolved, and we can continue to make progress for American families. Even with the progress that we've made, 1 in 3 Americans live in counties with unhealthy air pollution. And back home in the Tampa Bay area, I can think of many communities along the interstate highways, along our industrial centers. A lot of traffic, especially from heavy-duty trucks and buses, are really weighing on the air quality in those neighborhoods. So this is a way, thankfully, for EPA to continue its mission to clean up the air under the Clean Air Act, make sure they're doing it in a scientifically sound manner, working with industry always to improve and to protect the public health.
Congresswoman Kathy Castor, Democrat from Florida, today on the House floor. The House went on to pass this bill to reverse the EPA's rule for heavy-duty truck emissions by a vote of 221 to 203. It was mostly party line. 4 Democrats voted yes: Henry Cuellar of Texas, Dan Golden of Maine, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, and Mary Peltola of Alaska. And 1 Republican voted no, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. The Senate passed this bill in April by a vote of 50 to 49. President Biden says he will veto it. Overriding a veto takes a 2/3 vote of Congress, and both the House and Senate initial votes fall short of that. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern, a House Oversight Subcommittee hearing on the Energy Department's proposed rule for new gas stove efficiency. And live Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, a House Social Security Subcommittee hearing on the Social Security Administration's role in combating identity fraud. Listen to C-SPAN Radio anywhere on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, or on your smart speaker, say, play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A story at Roll Call. Florida Republican Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar and Texas Democratic Congresswoman Veronica Escobar have teamed up on a sprawling immigration bill that aims to revamp asylum processing, slash visa backlogs, and provide a path to legal status for millions of undocumented immigrants. The nearly 500-page bill announced Tuesday represents a rare bipartisan effort on immigration, a topic that has become a political wedge issue and source of stalemate in Congress for decades. And it includes proposals that incorporate elements from earlier, narrower bipartisan immigration bills. That reporting from Roll Call. The sponsors held a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol building in Washington. First, Congresswoman Salazar.
So this is a historical moment. 2 members of Congress, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican, have decided to work on one of the most divisive topics in this country, immigration. Who wants to do that? Very few people, but we're doing it. It is with this group of brave members, and specifically Veronica Escobar, from Texas that we are introducing the first complete bipartisan immigration reform law in the last 10 years. It is called the Dignity Act. And why the word dignity? Because it resonates. It's our intention to bring dignity to many sectors in this country who are under duress. Number one, we want to bring dignity back to the Border Patrol. Those thousands and thousands of agents who are overworked and underpaid and confronting a cascade of drugs, terrorists, and millions of people over the last 2 years. We need to stop that and bring dignity to the Border Patrol. Second, to the business community. Dozens of industries who need hands to fill millions of vacant jobs and cannot find them at this hour. And finally, bring dignity to those millions and millions of people who are invisible to most Americans, who are doing the jobs others are unwilling to do, the undocumented class. They deserve the respect we give our neighbors, even if we don't know them. I don't want anyone, listen to me well, I don't want anyone to confuse amnesty with dignity. This is not amnesty. Amnesty is what the undocumented have right now and have had for 30 years. Free roads, free schools, free hospitals. In the dignity law, everyone pays for their ride.
Congresswoman Maria Salazar, Republican from Florida, news conference with other sponsors of this bipartisan immigration bill, including, as she mentioned, Veronica Escobar, Democrat from Texas.
We address the tens of millions of people in the country who are undocumented, but who continue to work in small businesses, middle-sized businesses, big businesses, and are a part of our economy, whether you like it or not. And they are a part of our communities, whether anyone likes it or not. And so this ensures that we address an issue that Congress has punted on for decades. Second, it reforms outdated border processes that have exacerbated the humanitarian challenges that we are seeing. My community of El Paso has been all over the media, but some of the most dramatic moments were in December when we had hundreds of migrants sleeping on sidewalks in below freezing temperature. A few weeks ago, that number was in the thousands. And we rely on the goodwill of communities for what is a federal obligation. That is unjust, unfair, and it is not humanitarian. This bill reforms those outdated processes so that communities like El Paso, Brownsville, New York City, Chicago have a federal partner that assumes the responsibility that it should, and that it should have had over decades. It also reforms systems so that we don't have law enforcement agents like the United States Border Patrol performing humanitarian tasks. That's what's happening today. We are pulling men and women who are either members of OFO or Border Patrol and having them perform humanitarian tasks that should be handled in a modern, humane way. And in order to expedite the process, one of the things that is so critical and has never happened before is that the expedited asylum process, 60 days, will be guaranteed through due process. So we are working to ensure through this bill that legal representation will be available to all of those asylum seekers. And in addition to that, we open up legal pathways, because part of what has collapsed our asylum system today is that many people believe, and in fact it is true, they have only one line to get into.
Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, Democrat from Texas, at a news conference on Capitol Hill. With more on this bipartisan immigration reform bill proposal, joining us on the phone is Theo Meyer, national political reporter and co-author of the Early 202 newsletter at the Washington Post. Thanks so much for being with us. What is in this bill?
So this bill is being dubbed complete immigration reform by its two lead co-sponsors, as you mentioned, Veronica Escobar, a progressive Democrat who represents El Paso on the Texas border, and Maria Salazar, who represents part of Miami. There are a myriad number of measures in here, but in broad strokes, just to outline some of them, it would provide billions in additional funding for border security, and it would also create a two-step path to citizenship that would take at least 12 years for undocumented migrants who have been in the United States for at least 5 years. So there is a 7-year period in which they would pay restitution, people who meet that test and who also do not have criminal records. And then if they want to, there is a second 5-year process after that 7 years through which they can obtain citizenship.
What has been the leadership reaction to this bipartisan bill?
Well, I don't think there has been a huge amount of reaction to date, but I think it's fair to say that Republican leadership will take a lot of selling to get on board with it. House Republicans, as you know, passed their own border security bill only a few weeks ago, and it took a long time to, line up their efforts there. So I don't think there is necessarily strong desire among a lot of Republicans to, try to take up a bipartisan package, before trying to move their bill along, although their bill has, virtually no chance of passing the Senate.
And on the other side, the House Democratic leadership, have they been receptive?
Congresswoman Escobar has certainly kept, the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, in the loop on this. She has several Democratic co-sponsors who appeared with her this morning to present this bill. Hillary Scholten, who represents a swing district in Michigan, and Kathy Manning, who represents a similarly competitive district, or at least potentially competitive in North Carolina. But this is not the only, sort of effort to tackle immigration reform. And it's unclear, how any of these efforts will go.
We're talking with Theo Meyer from the Washington Post. You note in your article at WashingtonPost.com the last bipartisan attempt at immigration reform was a decade ago. How has the political atmosphere changed since then? Does it make it harder or easier to pass a bill now?
Yes. As you might remember, back in 2013, there was a strong sense among Republicans that this was one of the things that they needed to tackle after the 2012 election when Mitt Romney came up short. So there was a gang in the Senate. A bill passed the Senate, but then Speaker John Boehner refused to bring it up in the House, and it died. As Congresswoman Salazar described immigration reform, she called it the most toxic topic in Congress, and I think that's probably a pretty fair assessment. But there is a new, sort of generation who was not around during that 2013 push, including Salazar, including Escobar, who succeeded Congressman Beto O'Rourke when he gave up his seat to run for Senate in Texas. So they want to try, and I don't think that they're under any sort of illusions that it is going to be easy or even possible. Congresswoman Salazar told us yesterday, we understand that we are trying to open the Red Sea.
And finally, is it safe to say that the path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants might be the most controversial part of their bill?
I think that is probably fair. Some immigration reform efforts, have sort of tried to elide that, the framework that Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who has been working with Senator Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, over the past few months on this, the framework that they put out in December, included a pathway for dreamers to get citizenship. That is, people who were brought to the United States as children who are undocumented, but not for adults broadly to do so. So this bill is, much more ambitious in that way, in that it envisions, such a pathway for undocumented immigrants broadly. That is what Republicans have been most resistant to, in previous attempts to, try to find agreement on this issue.
Theo Meyer is national political reporter and co-author of the early 202 newsletter at The Washington Post. You can find his stories at thewashingtonpost.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
An article at Daily Caller, the mother of an autistic woman who was allegedly brutally murdered by an illegal alien tied to MS-13, testified on Tuesday before a House Judiciary Subcommittee and raised concerns about the crisis at the southern border. Tammy Noble's daughter, Kayla Hamilton, was allegedly murdered at the age of 20 by a 16-year-old illegal alien from El Salvador who was allegedly affiliated with MS-13 in July 2022 in Aberdeen, Maryland. The House Judiciary Committee released a report on Tuesday that detailed how the alleged murderer was not properly vetted when police in El Salvador knew of his gang affiliation. Tammy Nobles saying today the illegal alien allegedly went into Kayla's room while she was sleeping and used a charging cord to strangle her to death. Kayla tried to call her boyfriend, but it went to voicemail, which recorded 2 minutes and 30 seconds worth of audio of her being strangled. The alleged killer also violently sexually assaulted Kayla. Reporting from Daily Caller, here's part of Tammy Noble's testimony.
For me, this is not a political issue. This is a safety issue for everyone living in the United States. This could have been anyone's daughter. Kayla wasn't doing anything wrong, and she didn't deserve to be murdered. I don't want any other parent to live the nightmare that I am living. I am her voice now, and I am going to fight with everything I have to get her story told and bring awareness of the issue at the border. I will make sure her memory lives on. Murder itself is already taboo, but then you mention MS-13 and nobody wants to touch it. Nothing will change if nobody talks about the problem. The United States government has to secure our border. We need to properly vet all border crossers. The government could have placed a phone call to authorities in El Salvador and found out that he was a gang member, but they didn't. If we had stricter border policies, my daughter would still be alive today. Nothing will bring my daughter back, nor the pain, nor fix the pain. I'm not having her here, but I want to prevent this from happening to someone else's child. This is about protecting everyone here in the United States.
Tammy Nobles, one of the witnesses today at a House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration hearing, looking at immigration and border security. You're listening to Washington Today. Now to the war in Ukraine. This from the Washington Post. Ukrainian officials say troops are still battling around Bakhmut after Russia claimed to have seized the eastern city that has been a focal point of the war for months. Ukraine's armed forces and its deputy defense minister said fighting continues to rage on the embattled city's outskirts. Across the border, Russia said it launched an investigation Tuesday into an alleged attack in its Belgorod region, which after it accused pro-Ukrainian fighters of targeting the area. The Kremlin said it expelled the perpetrators from the region and blamed Ukraine. Kyiv denied any direct involvement. At the Pentagon today, the Press Secretary Pat Ryder asked about the situation in Bakhmut, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's phone conversation today with the Ukrainian Defense Minister, and also asked about President Biden's pledge at the G7 Leaders Summit in Japan that Ukrainian pilots will be trained to fly F-16 fighter planes.
The Secretary spoke with the Defense Minister today. Can you give us a sense of what the U.S. assessment is of the conditions on the ground in Bakhmut? Just any sense that the U.S. has as to who's in control and how much control Russia actually has of that area. And then secondly, can you provide us at this point any additional details on the F-16 training, et cetera? Is there any assessment yet on where the training would take place? Would it be on a U.S. base? And would the U.S. have to provide any, I guess, additional assets or anything anywhere for that? If you could just fill us in on any details at all on some of that.
Okay,
Thanks.
Lita. So in terms of Bakhmut, obviously we'll let the Ukrainians speak to the specifics of their operations and the particular situation on the ground, which I will note does remain very dynamic. I will say that even if Russia has taken ground in Bakhmut, we do not assess that it is a strategic gain and that Russian forces have paid an incredibly high price in terms of lives and capability. Meanwhile, our assessment is that Ukraine's defenses in the areas surrounding Bakhmut remain very strong. In terms of the F-16s, what I can tell you is that training will take place outside of Ukraine at sites in Europe. But in terms of more details, in terms of when that training will begin, how those jets will be provided, who will provide them, we're continuing to work with our international partners on that front, and we'll definitely keep you updated.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, also an Air Force Brigadier General, at his news conference today at the Pentagon. Russian news agencies report that a court in Russia today extended the pretrial detention of Wall Street Journal reporter and U.S. citizen Evan Gershkovich by 3 months. He was arrested in March and charged with espionage. He, the Journal, and the U.S. government all deny the charges. An update today from the State Department spokesperson Matt Miller.
Ask you about what your understanding is of the hearing that Evan Gershkovich had in Russia today.
Sure. So we understand the hearing took place and that Russia extended the pre-trial detention of Evan Gershkovich by an additional 3 months. We once again call on Russia to comply with their obligation to provide consular access to him. As I discussed yesterday, on Friday, they rejected our second request for consular access to them. The claims against Evan are baseless, and we continue to call for his immediate release as well as for the immediate release of Paul Whelan.
Okay. But you have gotten consular access to him once, right? Or no?
No, they have rejected consular access.
So you haven't gotten any?
Correct.
But there were people in the court today,
We did
right?
have representatives from the embassy in the court today.
But they weren't able to speak to him privately.
I don't know. I don't have an update on whether. I know they were there. I don't have an update on whether they were able to speak with him.
Okay. And per the people who were in there, you don't have any better understanding of the charges against him?
I think that my understanding of the hearing today was that it was a hearing on whether to continue to detain him, and they extended that detention by 3 months. I believe the Embassy Moscow will have a statement coming out. I thought it would be out before the briefing, but if it's not out, it'll be out in the next few minutes with any more details, but I don't have any more details from what happened inside the court.
Thank you.
May I follow up?
Yeah.
Evan's parents were also in attendance at the court. Did the U.S. help arrange their visit to Moscow? Do you approve of this visit? Anything you have on there?
We were aware that they visited Moscow. As I think we've said before, we have been in close contact with Evan's parents since immediately after his detention. We did not help arrange their travel. I will just say personally, I can only imagine how difficult it must be to see your child detained overseas, especially to be detained wrongfully. And so I'm certainly not going to criticize any parent for wanting to see their child. But that being said, we do have a level 4 travel advisory for Russia, and just speaking generally, we do not advise that U.S. citizens travel to Russia.
State Department spokesperson Matt Miller at his briefing today at the State Department in Washington. Evan Gershkovich is the first U.S. reporter since the Cold War to be detained in Russia on spying charges. U.S. government has declared him a wrongfully detained person and demanded his immediate release. Spokesperson Matt Miller also confirming that the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Michael McCaul, Republican, and the ranking Democrat Gregory Meeks visiting the State Department today to view a classified cable related to the August 2021 U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, a cable that was not previously turned over to the committee and over which Congressman McCaul had threatened to hold Secretary of State Antony Blinken in contempt of Congress. A Reuters article explains that Congressman McCaul has for months been seeking a dissent channel cable sent in July 2021 that a Wall Street Journal article in August 2021 said warned top officials of the potential collapse of Kabul soon after the withdrawal of U.S. troops. And finally, Congresswoman Jill Takuda, Democrat from Hawaii, congratulating the first Hawaiian-born and Pacific Islander to win the American Idol TV singing competition. She also took the opportunity to point out why the winner and his family no longer live in Hawaii. She spoke on the House floor.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Iam Tongi, a proud son of Kahuku, on winning American Idol's Season 21. A fellow child of the Windward Side, a keiki of Ko'olauloa, Iam is the first Hawaii-born and Pacific Islander contestant to ever win American Idol. Throughout his American Idol journey, Iam captured the hearts of viewers across the country with his incredible voice and soulful tributes to his late father, Rodney. While on the show, Iam not only showcased Hawaii's local music and sound, but also the challenges with getting priced out of paradise. Like many kama'aina, Iam and his family were forced to move to the mainland because of Hawaii's high cost of living. I have shared this with many of my colleagues here. Our children, like Iam, have become our greatest exports. That's not pono. That's not right. We must make Hawaii more affordable so that families like Iam's don't have to leave their home. Iam, your music, your story, and your spirit have inspired millions of Americans across this country. Hawaii is so proud of you, and wherever you go, please know Hawaii will always be your home, and we will always be your ohana. I yield back.
Congresswoman Jill Takuda, Democrat from Hawaii, on the House floor. Other members of the Hawaii delegation also sending out their congratulations. Senator Mazie Hirono, also a Democrat, tweeting congratulations to Iam Tongi, Hawaii's first ever winner of American Idol. Mahalo for using your voice to share our home and local music with millions across the country. Hawaii is so proud of you. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about, emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.